Hey friends, it's Kari. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing another Jonesing for Janus or Jonesing for Janus booktube challenge. And this challenge was created by Noah at Everyone Who Reads It Must Converse and Jack at Rambling Raconteur. So I will link those two videos in the description box. I've had a really great time comparing these texts, and this is something that I might continue doing on this channel if it's something that fits with what I'm reading at that particular time. But it's definitely a different way to read, and it does get you to think a little bit deeper about what you're reading and notice a few more things. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I have a lot of book tabs or anything like that. So I wasn't under pressure to find things in common. It just kind of was something that was at the forefront of my mind, and so it definitely enhanced my reading experience. The first book that I read was The Stranger by Albert Camus, and this is what's considered as kind of the standard French existential novel. This was published in 1942, and we follow our main character, Marceau, who's a French Algerian, and he is pretty much indifferent to just about everything. He's very reticent. He doesn't really explain a lot of his feelings. He doesn't really seem to have a lot of feelings or emotions, but there are two things that happen in this book that are pretty pivotal. And it's a short book, and in order to talk about it, I am going to have to talk about a lot of the plot features, so this might be considered a spoiler. So if you don't want to hear any of that, I'm sorry. I don't really know how I can do this video without kind of spoiling some of the plot. The first major thing that happens is Marceau's mother dies, and she had been sent to a home, like a nursing home, and when he goes to her funeral, a lot of people around him and that see him there before and during and then after, they are struck by the fact that he is very unemotional and he doesn't really act in the way that most people assume people should act. And so that definitely throws people off, and it becomes a very important part of his murder trial. He ends up shooting an Arab man on the beach, and we follow his trial. One of the points that's really brought up in this trial is that he was so unemotional and he seems to have no sort of remorse. Does that make him guilty? And that's one of the key questions, really, I think this book brings up. And it reminded me of something else I had read recently that talked about that we have had, miscarriages of justice, like in the Amanda Knox case, where she was essentially tapped for being a murderer because she didn't act the right way. This book does open up some questions about what exactly is the right way, and is it okay for other people to kind of set their own morals and standards and codes of behavior onto other people. The second book that I read was Who Walk in Darkness by Chandler Brossard, and this is considered by most people to be the very first Beat novel. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, the Beat generation was a literary movement that started in the 1940s and it lasted through the early 1960s. And this movement is generally characterized by a rejection of kind of those standards and morals and values that were common in the post-World War II era. Typically, Beat novels share some characteristics. One thing that they share is some sort of spiritual quest or search for enlightenment. Something else you'll also see is experimentation with drug use and also kind of sexual freedom. The narrator in this book is named Blake Williams, and he is living in the Greenwich Village area of New York City. Blake is kind of aimless. He does seem a little bit aloof, and he's not very communicative. So he has those characteristics in common with the main character in The Stranger. But I did feel like our narrator Blake in this book he is not without any sort of moral compass. I did feel like he had a conscience and he had more feelings than the character in The Stranger. We do see a kind of romance develop, and he does care about this person, whereas in The Stranger, even the main character in The Stranger even gets engaged, but that engagement is just kind of something that he falls into, and he doesn't display a lot of emotions. He basically says, well, if you want to get married, we can get married. I'm not really in love with you, but that's something we can do if it's what you want to do. Whereas Blake in Who Walk in Darkness, he displays some very caring attributes, and even though he is kind of a wandering, aimless character, I don't feel like he was without morals. The beat generation that is present in this novel definitely reminded me of Ernest Hemingway's The Lost Generation, and the writing style in this book has been compared to The Sun Also Rises, and I would agree with that wholeheartedly, because even in this book we don't have bullfighting, but we do have boxing, and so I saw a lot of similarities with that. The writing style for both of these books was very simplistic and very basic, and I think that was intentional because both of our characters are not very talkative, so it made sense for the characters. The copy that I have of Who Walk in Darkness, this is the suppressed original version. When this was published in the United States, there was a few people in the Greenwich Village scene who recognized themselves in this book, and one of those people, Anatoly Brossard, he threatened to sue the publisher if certain things were brought out in this book. In the American publication, they had to change the very first line of this book. And I found it interesting too, this was actually published in France initially, so it does have that in common with The Stranger as well. But the first line of this book says, "People said Henry Porter was a, quote, past Negro." The gentleman I just mentioned, Brossard, he was a writer and a literary critic, and he did throughout his life, quote, pass for white. And I don't really know that that's a fair judgment or assessment on this person, because for whatever reason he chose not to recognize or not to focus on that part of his background. You know, who are we to really judge this person for their life decisions in a very difficult time, because we are talking about the 1940s and 50s. This was published in 1952, but the character that is portrayed in this book, they use that as one of the reasons why Henry Porter should be deemed unlikable and, you know, not an authentic sort of person. That really for me was not the reason that I didn't like this person. I mean, everyone has secrets, I think, but he just seemed to be a user in this book and used the people that were around him, and that was the reason why I didn't like him and didn't think he was an authentic person. It had nothing to do with any sort of, you know, racial implications that the book brings up. I really enjoyed both of these books, and I think that they're the type of book that would promote discussion on a lot of different issues, literary genres and literary movements, discussions on writing style, discussions on major life questions. The existentialism is definitely here, I think, in both of these books, and I would recommend them, and I really enjoyed reading both at the same time. I hope you all enjoyed this comparison. I didn't really prepare for this one or write down a ton of notes. I wrote down a few people's names just because I am terrible with character names, but I hope that I fulfilled the challenge for this Jonesing for Janus BookTube challenge, and I will see you all in my next video. If you've read either of these books and have any thoughts on them, please shoot me a comment. And I hope everyone is having a great day.